Ida Early Comes Over the Mountain by Robert Birch. The Tiddlywinks Champion of the Whole Wide World. After the car had driven away, Ida glanced at a Tiddlywinks board on the shelf near the fireplace and said, "I don't suppose any of you would ever have guessed that once I was the Tiddlywinks Champion of the Whole Wide World." "I would," said Dewey. "I would have guessed it." And Clay said, "We like to play Tiddlywinks." "Do you really?" asked Ida. "Well, that's a happy fact to know. Why don't we just play a game of it right now?" She sat down cross-legged in the middle of the room, and the twins brought over the discs and the board with its tiny cup in the center. While they were sorting the button-like discs according to color, Ida Early said, "Now let's see. Do twins play separately, or should we add their scores together?" Clay and Dewey looked at her as if they thought she was crazy. "I mean, wouldn't it be fair for anyone under the age of 6 to team up? Shouldn't the rest of us be willing to combine their scores?" "Never," said Randall. "Not unless you combine ours." He and Ellen spent a lot of their spare time trying to beat the twins at Tiddlywinks. Occasionally one of them came out ahead of Clay, but no one had ever beaten Dewey. Randall had decided that either the twins had some special built-in talent for the game, or else all the hours they had played it by themselves while he and Ellen were in school had turned them into near-perfect scorers. Ellen asked Ida, "Are we going to begin a game before you start the stew?" "Oh, that's right," said Ida. "The stew. I know what. Why don't we take turns playing and cooking? Since you're the one who remembered the stew, I wouldn't feel right about not letting you begin it. Maybe you could find that meat and brown it in a little butter?" Ellen looked as if she were about to object to being left out of the first game until Ida added, "Unless you think you might not be quite old enough to shoulder such a responsibility." "I'm 12," said Ellen. She went across to the icebox and took out the beef that Aunt Ernestine had cut up. Dewey said, "Your company, Ida. You get to go first." "Thank you kindly," she said, and pressed down on one of the yellow discs that had been given her. It landed on the windowsill. Everyone laughed, and Ida acted upset. "We should have had a warm-up period," she said. "We Tiddlywinks champion players always have a warm-up period. But never mind, I'll catch up." Randall played next, and his disc landed at the edge of the small board. "Better than the windowsill," he said. Clay was next, and when he snapped his disc, he said, "Gingerbread." The twins had picked up that idea from their father. He had told them that their aim would be more accurate if they thought of something pleasant while taking it. They themselves had decided that it might be even better if they said "pleasant thought" aloud. Clay's disc landed on the board in the ring nearest the cup, scoring 15 points for him. Ida said, "Good for you." Dewey took the last turn. "Peanut butter," he said softly as he snapped the disc. It landed with a plink in the tiny cup. "Wow," said Ida. "What luck." Clay and Randall did not say anything. They might have said "wow" if Dewey had missed. Ida landed her next disc within a few inches of the cup, and after 2 more turns she announced she would try Clay and Dewey's system of having pleasant thoughts. She took careful aim and said loudly, "Feather bed." She pressed down on the disc. It flew out the window. "I shouldn't have thought of anything so fancy," she said. "It serves me right that the shot went wild." On her next try she shouted, "Straw mattress!" and the disc went into the cup. "See," she said, "didn't I tell you that it's best to be practical?" Dewey won the game, and Clay came in second. Ida was third. "Randall, you're the loser," said Ida. "I guess that means Ellen gets to take your place." She called across the room, "How's the stew coming?" "It's bubbling already." "Fine," said Ida. "You come join in this Tiddlywinks game so Randall can have his chance to help over there." Before Randall could argue, she turned to him. "You wouldn't mind finding a few potatoes, would you?" As he walked toward the pantry, she added, "Peel 'em clean and throw 'em in the pot." The next game was played while Randall peeled potatoes. Ellen was the loser, and Ida convinced her that she was to be treated to a rare opportunity. She could look for onions and carrots and put them in the stew. Randall was invited into the Tiddlywinks game again. Ida lost the next game, and she said, "It's probably my elbow that's holding me back. It hasn't been the same since I fell off a bucking mustang." "What's a mustang?" asked Clay. "A horse," said Randall. "Did you really fall off that one that was jumping up and down?" asked Dewey, and Clay said, "Tell us about it." "It's too terrible to discuss," said Ida with a shudder. "Let's play Tiddlywinks." She snapped down on one of the discs. "Hey," said Ellen, awaiting her turn to get back into the play. "You lost. It's my turn to play." "That's right," said Ida, "and it must be my turn to cook. But it wouldn't be fair if you weren't allowed to season the stew, now would it?" After all, you started the pot to perkin. A few minutes later, Ellen was at the stove putting salt and pepper in the stew, and when it was almost done, Randall was sent to see if the meat was tender. Stick a fork in a chunk of it, called Ida, who had sat cross-legged on the floor all morning. And while you're on your feet, see if you can locate those greens your aunt was talking about. Heat 'em in a boiler, and you might put the cornbread in the oven while you're at it. It'll soon be time to eat. At noon, Dewey remained champion Tiddlywinks player. Ida Early had been second once, and Clay had been runner-up the other times. When the last game ended, Dewey said, "All right, everybody, pay up." That was something else he had learned from his father. Mr. Sutton always said, "Pay up," whenever he happened to win a game, as if a bet had been placed on it. "I'll pay you with a handshake," said Ellen, reaching across and pumping Dewey's hand up and down. "I'll give you a love lick," said Ida, making a fist and giving Dewey a light tap on one arm. "I'll give you a lick to grow on," said Randall, punching him in the other arm. Dewey was laughing at the attention he was getting until Clay said, "And I'll give you a bite." He leaned over and bit his brother on the leg. Dewey screamed, and he and Clay started fighting. Ellen and Randall yelled at the twins to stop. The noise was at its loudest when Mr. Sutton and Aunt Ernestine arrived home. Finally, everyone quieted down, and Aunt Ernestine said huffily, "I certainly hope the children haven't been carrying on like this all morning." "No, ma'am," said Ida Early, winking at Randall. "I don't think they have, but to tell you the truth, I've been so busy cooking, I've hardly had time to notice." Bedding down. At supper there were vegetables from the garden and warmed-over stew. "Worthy of a king," said Mr. Sutton. "Too bad we didn't know any kings, or we'd invite them for a meal sometime." "Who'd you see in town today?" asked Randall. "Don't believe I saw any of your friends," said his father, "but I spoke to one of the Ragsdale boys when I stopped at the filling station." Ellen put down the ear of boiled corn that she was eating. "Marcus," she said. "Was it Marcus?" "The red-headed one," said Mr. Sutton, helping his plate to another serving of the butter beans. "We asked how everybody was getting along out there." "What'd you tell him?" Mr. Sutton laughed. "I told him everybody was fine." He paused and added, "I told him everybody had missed seeing friends since school let out." Ellen blushed, and Clay said, "Ellen's got a sweetheart." "Hush up and eat your supper," said Aunt Ernestine. "Ellen's too young to be interested in boys." Ellen frowned, and Mr. Sutton said, "Oh, I don't know, Ernestine. Mountain children grow up fast." Dewey turned to Ida Early. "Did you know Ellen has a sweetheart?" "Of course I did. Anybody as pleasant as Ellen probably has several sweethearts." "Marcus thinks I'm pretty," said Ellen. "Of course you are," said Ida, "but being pleasant is a heap more important than being pretty. That's why I named it first." "You're pleasant," said Dewey. "Why, thank you." Dewey added, "You're pleasanter than you are pretty." Everyone laughed. Clay said, "Ida Early's not pretty." Randall wondered what Ida would say. With one hand she dabbed at her face as if she were powdering it, and with the other one she pretended to fluff her hair. "You've never seen me fixed up," she said. The idea of Ida spruced up struck everyone as funny, including Ida herself. Randall noticed that she laughed more than anybody else. After supper, Mr. Sutton unfolded his newspaper. He handed the second section of it to the twins, who spread it out on one side of the table. They flipped pages until they came to the comic strips. Ellen glanced over their shoulders at a cartoon at the top of the page, and Clay said, "Read us the funnies." Dewey added, "Please." "Later," said Ellen. "I have to finish clearing the table." The twins had pushed bowls and platters aside to make room for the paper. "Randall, you read 'em to us, okay?" said Dewey. "Later," said Randall. "I have to help Ellen." He didn't want to risk a lecture from Aunt Ernestine by failing to get on with the work. His aunt was in her room now, but she always came back to see that nobody was resting on the job. "I'll read you the funnies," said Ida Early. She put a dish of candied yams into the cupboard and went over to the table. "Make some room." Clay and Dewey slid their chairs apart and were moving one into place for Ida when Aunt Ernestine came back. Dewey said happily, "Guess what, Aunt Ernestine? Ida Early's going to read us the funny papers." "No, she's not. Ida's going to wash the dishes." Aunt Ernestine sounded very sure of it. "Of course I am," said Ida, sitting down between Clay and Dewey. "But first we'll just have a look at Little Orphan Annie." "Oh, boy," said Dewey, "we like Little Orphan Annie." After Ida had read the strip to them, Clay said, "We like Dick Tracy, too." "Well, ain't that a jolly coincidence?" said Ida. "So do I. In fact, I like 'em all." "So do we," said Clay. "Let's read some more." Ida started reading Dick Tracy to them, but Aunt Ernestine interrupted. "The comic strips will wait. The dishes won't." "Oh, no, ma'am," said Ida. "It's the other way around. If the funnies are not red, they're liable to disappear. Somebody will throw 'em out or burn 'em up or something. But dirty dishes, why, I ain't never known of one of 'em to get away." She continued to read to the twins while Randall and Ellen washed and dried the dishes. They were accustomed to doing them anyway, and they seemed to go faster this time because they listened to Ida. Aunt Ernestine sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked as if she were about to explode. Randall and Ellen glanced over their shoulders at her and then looked at each other. They tried not to laugh. When the twins became sleepy, Ida put them to bed and sang to them. Randall listened from the kitchen. It was the first time he had ever heard a lullaby that included yodeling. It was Hush, Little Baby, which he'd heard often, but not quite the way it was being sung now. "Hush, Clay and Dewey, don't say a word. Ida's going to buy you a mockingbird. Yodelay, 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 hee ho." There were a lot of verses, and Ida yodeled a bit after each one. After "If that looking glass gets broke, Ida's going to buy you a billy goat," she bleated a few times like a goat. Ba, ba, ba. When Ida returned to the kitchen, Aunt Ernestine said, "That'll be all for today. You can go ahead home." "I'm home," said Ida. "You're what?" "I live here. Didn't you hire me?" Aunt Ernestine's mouth flew open, but she didn't say anything. Mr. Sutton put down the paper. "What's this?" he asked. Pointing to Ida, Aunt Ernestine said, "She says she lives here." Mr. Sutton said, "Why, Ida, I didn't know you wanted to live with us. We don't have an extra bed just now." "Oh, I didn't mean I'd sleep in the house. Thank you anyway, but a feed room in the barn is more my style." "Certainly not," said Aunt Ernestine. "It's ideal," insisted Ida. "I like the privacy." She looked at Mr. Sutton. "The cottonseed hulls make a soft bed, and all those empty feed sacks are fine cover. One of 'em puffed up with corn shucks makes a dandy pillow." She rushed on before Aunt Ernestine could protest. "To tell the truth, I slept there last night. I got here late, so I took the liberty of accepting your hospitality before you'd even offered it." Randall smiled. He remembered the corn shuck that had fallen to the floor when she arrived. At last, and over Aunt Ernestine's objections, Mr. Sutton consented for Ida to sleep in one of the feed rooms, but he insisted that she take along a heavy blanket and a quilt from the house. Ida slung the covers over one shoulder. Standing at the back door, she looked at Aunt Ernestine. "If you don't mind," she said with that same smile, "would you send somebody out to wake me when breakfast is ready?" "When breakfast is ready," said Aunt Ernestine. Randall knew she was thinking Ida should get up and help cook it. "Yes, ma'am," said Ida. "I'll come to the house in time to eat. I wouldn't expect you to send me a tray, but I appreciate your thoughtfulness anyway." She closed the door and went out into the night.